Former Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott is joining us now. He is in India for a series of engagements. Mr. Abbott, appreciate your time for NDTV. My first question, India-Australia bilateral trade is now the highest in nearly a decade. How do you see the two countries positioned to evolve global supply chains?
One of the best things that has happened to Australia in recent times is the ECTA, or Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement, that was finalised between India and Australia early in 2022. Under this agreement, as you say, a two-way trade is higher than it's been in many, many years. Of course, our exports to India are dominated by thermal coal. That's not always a very fashionable export these days, but it's absolutely essential if tens and tens of millions of Indian homes are to enjoy access to reliable, affordable electricity, because electricity is the foundation of modern life, because electrifying the country is incredibly important to Prime Minister Modi's plans. I think that Australia should remain an ongoing source of resource security for India.
Security concerns, Mr. Abbott, have been at the centre of India's ties with Australia and the formation of the Quad. In such an uncertain time with two raging wars, because we are in the midst of two wars, what is the Quad's role according to you in global security?
Well, I think the job of the Quad is to try to ensure that we don't have a third war. And as you know, there is a great deal of tension on the borders of China, mostly because the Beijing regime can't help but bully all of its neighbours. Now, one obvious flashpoint is Ladakh, where there has been Chinese aggression against Indian positions. Another perhaps even more fraught flashpoint is across the Straits of Taiwan. Now, I think it's very important that the Beijing government appreciates that any aggression across the Straits of Taiwan wouldn't just pit 1.4 billion Chinese against 25 million Taiwanese, but that it could easily pit China against, if not the whole world, at least China against the democracies. So I don't see the Quad as a partnership against anyone. I do see it as a partnership for democracy, for a rules-based global order, and for reasonable decency between countries. But I'm not seeing too much of that from the Beijing government right now. That's why I think the Quad has been probably the most significant geostrategic development since the formation of NATO 60 odd years back.
And from G20 to COP, Australia clearly has always championed India's role as the voice of the global south. How do you see India's rise amidst China's rising Indo-Pacific footprint?
I've always been impressed by the way India has been a voice of reason and moderation and has done its best to be a force for peace. For instance, India has been, if you like, the victim of aggression in all of the subcontinent's wars since 1947, where India has been proactive, as in East Pakistan in the early 1970s. It's been to facilitate independence and freedom as opposed to crush independence and freedom. So I think India has been a fundamentally benign power. I think it's been fundamentally a force for good. And that's why I keep saying that if 100 years hence there is to be a leader of the free world, it's as likely to be the Prime Minister of India as it is to be the President of the United States.
So in that space, do you see the role of Prime Minister Modi? You know, because Prime Minister Modi has won highest civilian awards in multiple countries, and there is this understanding that his view of the global south, the way he has positioned India, has made India the country to watch out for in the space of diplomacy.
Look, I've been very lucky to get to know Prime Minister Modi quite well over the last few years, particularly when we were both our respective countries' Prime Ministers. I regard Modi as a great transformational leader of India. I regard Modi as a statesman of the very first rank. But for Narendra Modi and Shinzo Abe, the Quad would never really have come into being. I also think that India has a pivotal role to play in the preservation of democracy, in the improvement of global trade, in the improvement of the global human rights situation. So I think India really is very much a force for good. And that's more important than ever, because just at the moment, rather than see a new world order, I fear that we might be on the verge of a new world disorder. But in a situation like that, democracies need to stick together. India and Australia need their friends, and certainly I would like Australia to be the best possible friend to India.
Before I get into the point that you made about global or the new world disorder, you know, there is that fear of global recession, which is looming large. Experts actually predict that Australia should be able to escape recession in 2024. What are your views?
Look, regardless of whether economies are facing headwinds or not, the important thing is to do whatever you reasonably can to improve productivity and to drive prosperity. And always the best way to do that is to try to get taxes as low as possible and to try to have regulation as light as possible. Now, Prime Minister Modi has been, again, a historic figure in terms of trying to make the Indian economy more liberal, more rationalised. We all remember the days of the licence Raj back in the 1970s. Well, Prime Minister Modi took the good work done by Prime Minister Singh, particularly when he was Finance Minister, and has really developed that over the last few years. So, good times or bad, I think that the policies of the Modi government in terms of trying to boost productivity, in trying to bring more and more Indians into a market economy as opposed to a quasi-barter economy, the better for India and ultimately the better for the wider world.
Your keenness in India's politics is certainly visible, because you have taken us back in time and how previous prime ministers have performed. Mr. Abbott, you know, last couple of questions to you. Do you see a new world order taking shape, because you have used the word disorder? And what could be India's role and Australia's partnership with India? You know, because it is often said that it is shared and defined by what is shared ideals.
Well, you see, India and Australia are part of a community of values, not just a community of interests, it's a community of values. Now, shared interests are important, but shared values are even more important. And one of the reasons why I have personally always seen India as a great natural partner for Australia is because India has shown a very strong long-term commitment to democracy and to the rule of law. When India became independent in 1947, there was a lot of scepticism about where Indian democracy might go. but India has well and truly built on the rather frail inheritance of democracy that it got back then, and has really flourished as a democracy. It's been exemplary as a democracy, so much so that today not only is India the world's largest democracy, but it's one of the world's oldest democracies. Now, that might seem a little surprising really, but it's true. India, with one tiny partial exception, has been continuously democratic since 1947. It's shown two things. First, that you don't have to be a rich country to be a genuine democracy, and second, that you can be a genuine democracy and still go from being relatively poor to being increasingly relatively rich. And from where I sit, it looks like that India is now roaring down the runway to economic takeoff. I look at the infrastructure build in India right now, the fact that you're building 8 airports a year, the fact that you're putting in 1.5 major urban metro rail systems a year, the fact that you're building 30 kilometres of motorway every single day. These are phenomenal achievements, and frankly they more than match the achievements of China even when it was going gangbusters. And this shows that a robust democracy is also more than compatible with very, very vigorous economic development and greater personal and family prosperity.
My last question to you, and of course this is a way you may say that it's about the personal prosperity, but this is about the Indian diaspora in Australia, which is flourishing and certainly is very robust. How has their role been in the last few years in particular? Of course, during your tenure as the Prime Minister, but has it more evolved in the last 2 years?
Look, the Indian community in Australia is our fastest growing migrant community. It's gone from being quite small 30 years ago to being almost 1 million strong now, and it's growing very, very rapidly indeed. I've got to say as an Australian that migrants from India make outstanding Australians, absolutely outstanding Australians. They join Team Australia. They integrate very well into the workplace, into neighbourhoods. They like Australia, we like them. They're very comfortable with the Australian way of life, and frankly I think they've been almost to a man and a woman an absolute adornment to our country.
All right, thank you so much for speaking to NDTV. Former Prime Minister of Australia, Tony Abbott there.
Thanks for having me.